Hello, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Violence erupts in Mexico after drug lord El Mencho killed after US-backed operation. The next round of US and Iran talks scheduled for Thursday in Geneva. And Russia fires scores of missiles at Ukraine as Hungary threatens to block EU sanctions. First, this morning, highways across several states in Mexico have blocked cars and set ablaze. It's after a major military operation killed the country's most wanted cartel leader, El Mencho, on Sunday. Flights to parts of the country have been suspended and residents are being urged to stay indoors. Here's more.
Mexico has been gripped by violence following the killing of one of the country's most powerful drug lords, Nemesio Oseguera, better known as El Mencho, during a military operation in the western state of Jalisco on Sunday. The Defense Ministry says a shootout left Oseguera seriously injured. Officials say he later died while being airlifted to Mexico City. The Mexican embassy in Washington said U.S. intelligence assistance supported the operation. The raid sparked an immediate wave of retaliation across several states. Burning vehicles, road blockades and arson attacks by armed groups were reported in Jalisco, Michoacán, Guanajuato and Oaxaca.
We experienced critical hours in which incidents were addressed in different parts of the state and the metropolitan area. Coordination between various agencies at all levels of government was key. The main objective on this day has been to safeguard the safety of the people. Therefore, early this morning, from this security meeting, which is in permanent session, we activated Code Red, which remains in effect.
Gunmen used torched cars to block highways in an apparent attempt to disrupt security operations. Residents described scenes of fear and uncertainty as the unrest unfolded.
Look, now we're scared. We only go out when it's necessary because people don't know whether to go out or what to do. It's good that they're finishing with these organizations, but there's fear because of what is happening now. You don't know how to react.
The U.S. Embassy in Mexico urged American citizens in affected areas to shelter in place and limit movement, citing security concerns. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum sought to reassure the public, saying there was absolute coordination between federal and state authorities and urged people to remain calm. Oseguera's death marks a significant blow to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of Mexico's most powerful criminal organizations and a major player in cocaine and fentanyl trafficking into the United States. However, security analysts warn that the removal of such a high-profile cartel leader can trigger violent power struggles, raising concerns that further instability may follow.
An armed man was shot dead after entering the secure perimeter of Mar-a-Lago, the Florida residence of US President Donald Trump, the US Security Service said on Sunday. According to officials, agents observed the individual near the north gate of Palm Beach property carrying what appeared to be a shotgun and a fuel can. The man allegedly breached the secured area, prompting agents to respond. Trump was not at the estate, but was in Washington at the time, along with First Lady Melania Trump. Investigators said that the suspect was a man in his early 20s from North Carolina. Authorities have not yet released his identity and the investigation remains ongoing. US President Donald Trump has raised a temporary tariff on imports to 15%, just a day after the US Supreme Court struck down his previous trade program. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump has increased a temporary tariff on all US imports from 10 to 15%, the highest level allowed under Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act. The decision came less than 24 hours after the Supreme Court ruled that he had exceeded his authority by imposing sweeping global tariffs under a 1977 emergency powers law. In a 6-3 decision, the justices said the International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not grant the president the powers he claimed. In response, Trump turned to a different and largely untested law that allows tariffs of up to 15% for 150 days, unless Congress votes to extend them. The White House says certain goods, including critical minerals, metals, and energy products, are exempt. The decision has also created confusion over existing trade agreements. US Trade Representative Jameson Greer said countries that negotiated higher tariff deals must honor them. Exports from Malaysia, Cambodia, and Indonesia will continue to face agreed rates of 19%, even though the universal rate is lower.
Nothing changes where they'll be paying tariffs, and we will not be paying tariffs. Our deal with India is they pay tariffs. This is a reversal from what it used to be, as you know.
Earlier, some countries welcomed the court's ruling. French President Emmanuel Macron said it showed the strength of democratic checks and balances.
We shouldn't go too fast either, because I note that President Trump, after a few hours, said he had revised the measures to introduce new tariffs, but this time more limited and for everyone. So we will see. We will look exactly at the consequences, what can be done, and we will adapt.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz warned that continued uncertainty over tariffs is damaging for both Europe and the United States. In London, the government said it expects its privileged trading position to continue, although business leaders warned the higher rate could hurt British firms. And South Korea convened an emergency meeting to assess the impact.
Staying on this, economists warn the latest US tariff shift could have a wider consequence for prices, growth and global supply chains. Experts say uncertainty alone may weigh heavily on businesses and consumers.
Economists say the latest changes to US trade policy risk feeding inflation and slowing growth at the same time.
What it means is essentially twofold. The first thing is that prices will be higher. The cost of importing goods from these countries will be higher. So that is likely to be passed on to consumers in some way. And the other thing is that we're likely to see weaker activity as a result of it as well. So we're going to have weaker growth, and we're also going to see higher prices, which are likely to translate into higher interest rates than otherwise as well. So overall, there will be a negative effect from all these avenues.
Uncertainty is now a key risk. Companies that believed trade frameworks offered stability may delay investment or expansion plans. US President Donald Trump argues tariffs are needed to shrink the trade deficit, the gap between imports and exports. But US government data shows the deficit has widened to roughly $1.2 trillion, up 2.1% compared with last year. Trade between the United States, Mexico and Canada alone amounts to around $1.5 trillion in imports and roughly $1 trillion in exports each year. Supply chains are deeply integrated, particularly in the automotive sector, where parts can cross borders multiple times before a vehicle is finished.
You know, American consumers would face higher prices from tariffs, but also if you're an exporter, if you're a small business that sends products abroad, you're going to face foreign retaliation. And on top of that, right, like the US, Mexico, and Canada have pretty tightly integrated supply chains. So the average car made in the US or in the Mexico, Canada, US zone tends to travel across borders up to 8 times. And so if you're imposing a tariff of 25% each time a part comes across the border, or if the whole automobile crosses the border, it's going to get pretty costly pretty quickly.
The Supreme Court ruling has also opened the door for businesses to seek refunds for earlier tariffs collected under the invalidated law. Retail and business groups say reimbursements could provide an economic boost, particularly for small importers, though any repayment process may involve lengthy legal battles. Meanwhile, corporate disclosures tracked by Reuters show companies across Asia-Pacific have already reported financial losses, supply shifts, and market withdrawals as tariffs escalated over the past year.
Explosions in Lviv that killed a policewoman and injured 25 others on Sunday have been called a cynical and cruel terrorist act by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The pair of blasts came as Russia separately launched an overnight drone and missile strike targeting energy infrastructure in multiple Ukrainian regions.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has denounced a pair of explosions that left a 23-year-old woman dead and 25 wounded in Lviv as a cynical and cruel terrorist act. Police say the first explosion occurred after a patrol responded to a report of a suspected shop break-in. A second device exploded shortly afterwards. Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko said a woman had been detained in connection with the investigation. Zelensky criticized the Lviv blasts.
We had several updates from the Ministry of the Interior, given by the Minster, Ihor Klimenko, and other law enforcement officials about the investigation on the terrorist act in Lviv. It is difficult to call it otherwise, as it was precisely a cynical and cruel terrorist act.
Separately, Russian strikes over the weekend hit Kyiv, the Black Sea port of Odessa, and central Ukraine. Dnipro, Kirovohrad, Mykolaiv, Poltava, and Sumy regions were also targeted. Zelensky added that Russia was increasingly targeting logistics facilities, transport and water supplies.
Also today, on the call with regional representatives, we again discussed the new Russian tactics for their massive strikes, which most often target logistics facilities, and first of all, railways, also sites which are connected to the water supply.
Meanwhile, Russian officials say a massive Ukrainian missile attack has inflicted serious damage on energy infrastructure and disrupted supplies of power, heat and water in the Belgorod region. This area close to the Ukrainian border has frequently come under attack from Ukrainian forces. It comes as the 4th anniversary of the war will be marked this week.
Demonstrators gathered in Washington, D.C. on Saturday ahead of the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Supporters of Ukraine met near the Lincoln Memorial for a rally that featured speakers and performers. Among them was the European Union's ambassador to the United States, who said it was a painful return for a 4th year while the war continues. After the rally, demonstrators marched through the streets of Washington to the residence of the Russian ambassador. Diplomatic efforts between Washington and Tehran are back on the table, with new negotiations scheduled in Geneva later this week. But while both sides signal movement, sharp disagreements remain.
A third round of talks between the United States and Iran is set to resume in Geneva on Thursday. That's according to Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, whose country has been mediating between the two sides. He said negotiations are proceeding with what he described as a positive push to go the extra mile towards finalising a deal. A senior Iranian official says the two sides remain sharply divided, particularly over the scope and sequencing of US sanctions relief. However, the official says Tehran is now offering fresh concessions in an effort to keep diplomacy alive and avert potential military escalation. Iran is reportedly prepared to consider sending part of its most highly enriched uranium abroad, diluting the remainder, and participating in a regional enrichment consortium in exchange for recognition of its right to peaceful nuclear enrichment and the lifting of economic sanctions. Tehran has also signalled openness to allowing US companies to invest in its oil and gas sector as part of a broader economic package. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, suggests Washington is losing patience.
I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure, with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do. And yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place. And yet they've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb-making material. And that's really dangerous.
The talks come amid heightened tensions as Washington continues to build up military assets in the Middle East while pressing Tehran to curb its nuclear program. Experts say that both sides remain far apart, with key disagreements over sanctions, enrichment rights and regional security issues.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has announced a series of countermeasures after Ukraine suspended crude oil deliveries to Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline. Orbán said Hungary would safeguard its energy security and act until deliveries resume. Measures include halting diesel exports to Ukraine, blocking a planned €90 billion EU military loan to Kyiv, and opposing the bloc's proposed 20th sanctions package against Russia. Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó said Hungary would veto the new sanctions at Monday's EU Foreign Affairs Council, accusing Ukraine of political blackmail aimed at disrupting fuel supplies ahead of Hungary's elections. He added that Budapest had released part of its strategic oil reserves and secured alternative supplies through maritime routes. North Korea's Workers' Party of Korea has re-elected Kim Jong-un to its top post as General Secretary during a party congress in Pyongyang on Sunday. State media said delegates praised Kim for expanding nuclear capabilities and strengthening the country's regional position. Congress began on the 19th of February and is expected to outline the next phase of the country's weapons program. New members were elected to the Central Committee and the party rules were revised. Some senior officials were reportedly removed. Now to some art, and Mexican artist Pedro Reyes showcased his international project Disarm as the inaugural exhibition of the Centro de las Artes Emercives in Mexico City. He turned confiscated firearms into works of musical instruments.
At first glance, you might think you're looking at a set of futuristic high-tech musical instruments. But look closely and you'll begin to notice some rather unusual parts. That's because these instruments originally started out as firearms, before being transformed and reborn as automated and non-automated musical instruments. The project, called Disarm, is the work of Mexican artist Pedro Reyes. He says the idea gained momentum after thousands of weapons were seized in northern Ciudad Juarez, at the height of drug-related violence.
We managed to collect 7,000 weapons, and that's where the process of making musical instruments began. It was a whole series of experiments to make percussion, wind and string instruments, and it is precisely an effort that has to do with the problem of the proliferation of firearms that come mainly from the United States.
Reyes began the project in 2012. Working with musicians and metalworkers, the reimagined instruments have since been featured in concerts across 15 cities on 5 continents. He says the goal is to create a broader social impact by sparking discussions about gun control and exploring how culture can help build safer communities. Project Disarm, therefore, stands as proof that negative energy can be redirected and transformed into something inspiring.
Now we'll take a break. When I return, I'll discuss with an expert the implications of US Supreme Court decision on Trump's unlawful tariffs and if this will impact his visit to China. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now to the US and the damning blow that US President Donald Trump's global tariffs has had. On Friday, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump violated federal law when he unilaterally imposed sweeping tariffs across the globe. Trump called the ruling a disgrace. It was also announced that a date had been set for Trump to visit China's leader Xi Jinping in March to discuss trade and a host of other issues. Joining me now from Beijing is Andrew Leung, an international independent China strategist. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Actually, I'm joining you in Hong Kong.
Oh, in Hong Kong, not Beijing. Thank you. Great. So my first question is, what does the Supreme Court's tariff reversal mean for China? And has this given China a helping hand, do you think?
Well, this latest Supreme Court ruling, of course, is throwing a lot of spanners in the works for Trump's global tariffs war, not only against China, but of course imposed on its allies and in fact across the world, because President Trump thinks that the tariffs is a wonderful weapon to make America great again by coercion, by bullying other countries to bend to Americans' will and to serve Americans' interests. However, against this, immediately after the Supreme Court ruling, President Trump already enacted new tariffs using a different piece of legislation, which is on trade rather than on national security. And again, on the advice of his best legal minds, using the trade piece of legislation obviously has much less of a challenge. So still, he's using the tariff war to exact Americans' best interests.
I see. So do you think that this will therefore have a better impact with negotiations when Trump eventually meets Xi Jinping in March, do you believe?
Well, first of all, there are three questions or three dynamics in his much vaunted visit to Beijing to meet President Xi Jinping. Let's not forget that President Trump is recently become more triumphant using his unilateral sanctions and also unilateral action to achieve his agenda, which is, of course, make America great again by pivoting towards basically the Western Hemisphere. And that's why he, on day one, when he went back to the White House, he wanted Greenland, and also he wanted to make Canada the 51st state of the United States, even though both demands are meeting headwinds, if not a great deal of repercussions from his American allies. But nevertheless, this pivot to the Western Hemisphere has been enshrined in the latest national security strategy, which was released only a couple of only weeks ago, reaffirming that, of course, the United States regard the Western Hemisphere as its homeland, which encompasses the entire North America, including Canada and Greenland, but also countries in South America, for example, Venezuela and Cuba, and various other countries. However, this does not mean that President Trump is giving up on exerting Americans' influence in Asia Pacific, because after all, America has a great deal of economic and geopolitical interest in Asia Pacific. Not least is the continuing rivalry and confrontation against China. But at the United States, President Trump wants to achieve this by offshore balancing, which means relying on Americans within British allies like Japan and South Korea, forming closer military alliance together, and also Australia, for example, the Australian United Kingdom nuclear submarine deal.
And Andrew, sorry, just to interrupt you.
And India.
Yes, and just to state thank you for, that's a very broad perspective in regards to obviously what Trump wants to do with the tariffs and his relations with a number of global partners. Now, we know that Xi Jinping spoke to Trump earlier this month in regards to purchasing more soybeans was on the topic. He said he might purchase more after his February call. Do you think Xi Jinping might reverse that decision now with this reversal from the Supreme Court from the US?
And of course, against Americans' coercion and bullying and using tariffs, China, unlike many other countries, has found a very effective countermeasure in terms of China's global dominance over rare earths, which of course translate into China's dominance over the supply and value chain regarding rare earth elements, which are found is essential use in all sorts of products, especially high-tech products and also military hardware, including the latest fifth-generation fighters like F-35. And so that is a very effective measure, and hence President Trump appears to want a temporary pause in the kind of mutual spiral towards confrontation. Obviously, he wants to have, he doesn't want war, nor does China, nor does any other country, especially the big powers, because all the Greek powers tend to be nuclear armed, and any conflict could spell Armageddon for the entire world. But Trump remains focused on exacting Americans' maximum interest. But because of this countermeasure by President Xi, he wants to have a temporary pause so that he can, reshore all the manufacturing to the United States and try to recalibrate how to deal with China by building more manufacturing capacity in the United States and also in increasing or trying to achieve dominance in 21st century technologies like AI and so on.
Yes.
So that's the kind of recalibration. But on the part of the rest of the world, I think that we're seeing a realization that the United States, which used to underpin the world order, does not appear to be that reliable as before. So all countries, including Europe, including the UK, and indeed the global South, including Central Asia, including South Africa, and even certain parts in Latin America, and particularly in Asia. They're trying to, not to make an enemy of the United States, but to recalibrate the relationship.
And Andrew, sorry, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt just because I need to get through a number of questions because we don't have a lot of time. Right. I'm just going to say, why do you think it's important for the two biggest economies to establish a trade truce and to provide stability in the global economy? Obviously, the US wants something, China also wants something. Why is it important that, an agreed trade clause is created between the two economies?
Well, since the end of the Second World War, the United States, under previous administrations, want to bring China into the global trading system, underpinned by the rule-based order led by the United States. In a sense, most of these orders are written into the World Trade Organization rules. So the hope was that by bringing China into the system, China could open up and could be more like the West. However, while China embraces the global system, the global order, and become the world's now the largest trader, the largest manufacturer, however, the Chinese ideology, the China political economy remains even more distant from the West, based on the state capitalism and of course socialism and communism. And also, there is a perception that China is now gaming some of the rules. And hence, there was a huge pushback against China on those fronts. And President Trump sees that the so-called global system, the international order, as working at American disadvantage. So he's using a wrecking ball in terms of the tariffs to change the rules and reshuffle all the cards. But all of a sudden, China's found this countermeasure of rare earths. And the United States can no longer call the shots. So he's now trying to call a pause so that he can regroup and retrench and trying to reshoring the manufacturing to the United States and trying to figure out another way how to exact the best American interest in the relationship, more stable relationship with China.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Leung, and for your insights into this. I'm sure we'll be catching up with you more closely to when the two leaders meet later in March.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, after the break, we're going to take a quick one. We'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Syria has secured a $50 million funding project package from the World Bank to upgrade its transport infrastructure as the country continues its economic recovery. The deal was reached during talks in Damascus between Transport Minister and the bank's Middle East Regional Director. The funding will be used to buy 15 locomotives and conduct technical assessments of Syria's railway network for future maintenance and upgrades. Officials also discussed a proposed phosphate transport corridor to improve export routes. Syria has, oh, no, that's not it. Now we turn to Pakistan, and Pakistan has carried out overnight strikes inside Afghanistan, with the Taliban saying civilians were killed. Islamabad insists it targeted militant camps linked to recent suicide attacks in Pakistan. Here's the report.
Pakistan says it launched intelligence-based strikes on 7 alleged militant camps near the Afghan border, describing them as a retributive response to recent suicide bombings, including attacks during Ramadan. Afghanistan's ruling Taliban says the strikes hit civilian homes in Nangarhar and Paktika provinces, killing at least 18 people, among them women and children.
Last night in Nangarhar province, in Behsood district, at 12 a.m, enemy Punjabi aircraft bombed us. As a result, civilians, including women, children and elderly people, were martyred with great cruelty during this month of Ramadan. This was a crime. Last night it felt as if Judgment Day had passed over us.
Our demand is that there must be an investigation, because this is not the first time. During the Republican period, the Americans used to attack us, and now they are doing it. A Pakistani aircraft came and carried out the attack.
Local Taliban officials say most of the deaths occurred in a single extended family. In Paktika province, a guest house and a religious school were also hit. Islamabad accuses Kabul of failing to act against militants from Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan and Islamic State Khorasan province, groups it says are operating from Afghan soil. It says it has evidence linking recent attacks in Pakistan to leadership figures based across the border. The strikes mark a sharp escalation in tensions, just months after the two sides agreed to a fragile ceasefire following deadly border clashes.
Russia's economy is also far from being in perfect shape. Restaurant margins are shrinking and rising costs are forcing closures across Russia, even in Moscow. Owners say January closures are normal after the busy holiday season, but many worry the industry is becoming too risky for small profits.
Restaurants and cafes in Russia are closing at the fastest rate since the start of the Ukraine war. Even in wealthy areas of Moscow, spending is falling. Closures are seen from the capital to Vladivostok and signal a slowdown in the $2.8 trillion economy.
Years ago, people said a restaurant should have a margin of 20 to 25%. After the pandemic, the benchmark became 15%, and that was considered good. Today, many places operate with only a few percent. Many owners would not even start this business now if they could choose again. It would be easier to put the money in a bank and earn returns there instead of taking constant risks for minimal margins.
At a cafe in southwestern Moscow, cake and pastry shelves are empty and the espresso machine is silent. Owner Yekaterina Oreshkina said they did not expect such a downturn. A slow January, a 50% rise in ingredient prices, high rent and taxes forced her to close this branch, though her other cafes remain open.
Every year in January, restaurants close. Why? Because the last quarter of the year is the peak season for the industry. October, November, and especially December are when restaurants make money. If someone decides to shut down, they usually do it in January. So this is completely logical, nothing new. It happens every year. As for the number of restaurants that closed in Moscow, there is always a balance between closures and openings. In 2025, there were still more openings than closures. For now, I don't see anything catastrophic.
As expenses climb and profit margins decrease, more businesses may struggle to stay afloat as the industry is facing another year full of uncertainty.
Turkey has signalled its readiness to train police, rebuild the health and education sectors and contribute troops as part of Gaza's reconstruction. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan made the commitments at the inaugural meeting of US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace in Washington on Thursday.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said Turkey is ready to assist in the rehabilitation of Gaza's health and education sectors and help train police forces in the embattled Palestinian territory. Fidan made the remarks in Washington at the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace chaired by U.S. President Donald Trump. He stressed Ankara's continued support for U.S.-led peace efforts and stated that Turkey was prepared to provide troops for a proposed international stabilization force for Gaza. According to Fidan, the ceasefire in Gaza was achieved after 2 years of human suffering, crediting what he described as President Trump's personal engagement and collective diplomatic efforts for the breakthrough. But he went on to warn that Gaza's humanitarian situation remained fragile and that ceasefire violations continued to occur, calling for a prompt, coordinated, and effective international response.
Our message is this: whether it's humanitarian aid, the administration of Gaza, infrastructure and superstructure services, or contributing to international stabilization force, we are ready to provide all kinds of support in all these areas.
Several other countries have already pledged to send troops for the proposed stabilization force, including Indonesia, Morocco, Kazakhstan, and Albania. The initiative is aimed at ensuring security, stability, and reconstruction efforts in Gaza following the conflict in which tens of thousands of people in Gaza have been killed. While in Washington, Fidan also reiterated Turkey's hope that the United States would pursue what he described as genuine negotiations with Iran. He added that diplomatic engagement would help avert the need for a military operation or broader war in an already volatile Middle East region. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
In Turkey's Hakkari province, heavy snowfall and strong winds have created rare snow waves on mountain slopes, attracting nature enthusiasts and photographers. Let's take a look.
In Turkey's southeastern Hakkari province, rare snow waves have drawn the attention of nature enthusiasts. Heavy snowfall last week saw snow depths reach up to 2 meters in parts of the high-altitude Durankaya district. Strong winds near Yeni Mahalle sculpted the snow into undulating patterns on the mountain slopes. Nature lovers and photographers visited the area to view and capture the unusual formations, which were also recorded in drone footage. Experts say the phenomenon occurs when persistent strong winds shape the snow into parallel ridges and troughs, similar to sand dunes in desert environments.
S&P Global Ratings has upgraded Armenia's outlook to positive, citing stronger security and improving regional connectivity, as diplomatic progress with Azerbaijan improves regional stability.
A new report by S&P Global Ratings highlights improvements in regional connectivity driven by ongoing efforts to normalize Azerbaijan-Armenia relations. The Washington meeting in August 2025 is credited with stabilizing the security environment and reducing the risk of renewed conflict. Consequently, the agency has revised Armenia's outlook to positive from stable, citing improved security and resilient medium-term performance. It adds that further diplomatic progress could strengthen fiscal and external positions, though setbacks or disruptions could weigh on growth. Meanwhile, the report by S&P Global Ratings affirms Armenia's sovereign credit ratings at BB-/B. S&P projects Armenia's economy to grow around 5% annually between 2026 and 2029, supported by resilient domestic demand, private investment and a strong labour market. Fiscal consolidation is progressing, with government debt remaining moderate and the banking sector well capitalised and profitable. The report also notes that Armenia's ties with Russia remain complex. Political relations have cooled since 2023, but the country continues to rely heavily on Russian trade, energy and financial flows.
After the break, I'll unpack more of Armenia's S&P Global Ratings with a guest. Make sure you stay with us. Welcome back to A News Now. The S&P Global Ratings has revised Armenia's sovereign outlook from stable to positive in its latest assessment, projecting that whilst economic growth is expected to soften, it will remain relatively strong, averaging around 5% annually between 2026 and 2029. Joining me now is Parvana Valieva, Member of the Parliament of the Republic of Azerbaijan, to discuss more of that. Now, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Right, my first question really is, what is your overall assessment of this S&P report?
Yeah, the S&P Global Rating is a company that gives credit ratings to governments, to private sector companies, and etc. Also, they give conduct research, risk analysis, etc. And this global rating revised Armenia, their outlook from stable to positive. Also, I would like to note here that two leading rating agencies also revised our Azerbaijan's credit rating. This Moody's and Fitch, these credit agencies, was upgraded our status to investment grade from stable to positive. Why it is important? Because a country's credit rate shows how risky it is to lend money to that country. When agencies such as Moody's, S&P Global Ratings change a country's outlook, it sends a strong signal to investors, international banks, foreign governments, investors, businesses, etc. And a better outlook can also strengthen national currency, make investors more confident, attract more financial support, foreign investments, and also lower borrowing costs for the government. So even though the ratings stayed the same, moving the outlook from stable to positive is a good sign. And Armenia and Azerbaijan get these signs because the main reason, underlying reason, is peace talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenia and Azerbaijan are making progress in this normalization process after last year's Washington Accords. If relations normalize, it means the risk of war decreases, security becomes more stable, and the investors feel safer. And also it improves economic activity. Armenia and Azerbaijan starts build upon mutual trading economic activities. Azerbaijan oil products exported through Georgia to Armenia, and they are discussing what can be imported from Armenia to Azerbaijan, and these two countries also continue confidence building through civil society organizations. Less geopolitical risks means lower financial risk.
Vali, I'm just going to interrupt, sorry, because you said so much with that one question. So I just want to kind of just break things down a little bit before you go off. You mentioned quite a bit in regards to Azerbaijan and Armenia peace relations, and in what your opinion you think is helping that peace process to, in regards to the stability of the country. Now, what do you think then are the concrete steps in the peace process between now and the June elections that will happen in Armenia? Do you think that would strengthen both Armenia's economic outlook and political stability?
Yes, because now the region also starts a new chapter, new phase of relations with US, new trade agreements with US, which also US is a economic leader of the world. This is also increases reputation of the region, of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And one more game changer in this region is AI. AI is our future for development. We also signed agreements with US regarding data centers and AI, and this increased reputation give good credit ratings through the elections, as you asked. Yes, Armenia goes to parliamentary elections in June. This also affects, can have positive influence to have political political things that also gives an achievement. A final peace can be achieved, can be signed after the elections. This is also positive for the population, for the people. Increases their reputation. Right now, Armenian leadership reputation, such risk. But there are still risks regarding this reporting, S&P reporting. It says that relations with Russia are stable, a peace agreement is not finalized with Azerbaijan, and what next, what can be next happen if peace becomes permanent, rating could go up.
Yes.
And if tensions rise or Russian money flows stop suddenly, ratings could go down.
And it's something that we'll come to hopefully within this interview. But to what extent then could this emerging connectivity have contributed to the improvement in Armenia's outlook? How significant might you think the deeper regional economic integration be for Armenia's longer-term credit journey?
Azerbaijan and Armenia are trying to improve their relations, and this would make regions safer. As you know, south and north part of the region are sanctioned area that's not comfortable for the people who send cargo and receiving cargo. But recent stability in the South Caucasus attract businesses. If the region is not stable, there is not any conflict, then investors may feel more confident, and it attracts the businesses. For example, also regional connectivity is gonna emerge through trip route, Trump route, and this is also promising for more opportunities for businesses, for investors. For example, now EBRD's European Union through EBRD supports feasibility assessment of Nakhchivan railway for the trip route project, and also Turkey started construct railway, the part of Gars, Dilucu, linking Nakhchivan to Turkey. Also, U.S. investments through trip development company comes to the region,
and Ms. Valieva,
which also.
Sorry to interrupt there. I just wanted to get one extra question in before we have to let you go. Just, you briefly mentioned Russia, and I just want to just quickly pinpoint that. How complex and economically costly could Armenia's relationship with Russia be, given its continued reliance on Russian energy trade and financial channels?
You know, Armenia still depends heavily on Russia for trade and money transfers. This country has a current account deficit. It imports more, but less export. This is also feasible here that Armenia plays a crucial role in re-exporting things that it imports from EU and export to Russia. This is not normal relations, and it's heavily dependent on trade with Russia a lot. They are part of Eurasian connectivity, Eurasian alliance, and they get some tax and customs procedures. They have some tax exemptions, but if the report also outlines that if
Ms.
such
Valieva, sorry,
money
I think we're out of time.
Between Armenia and Russia, it can stop the flows. This rating could go down.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry we had to cut this short. We've run out of time. But thank you so much for explaining the S&P global ratings for Armenia and what that means for the region. Thank you very much, Ms. Valieva.
Thank you for having me.
That's the news for this hour. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for more updates. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you shortly.